6 or 7 years now, we have read this story, and I've gotten a lot of requests for it. The story is called Duel in the Snow, or Red Ryder Nails the Cleveland Street Kid.
So I've seen a lot of YouTube videos recently tackle the subject of Gene Shepherd and the Christmas Story movies in a very clickbaity sort of way.
So you've heard of A Christmas Story, and most likely its new sequel on HBO Max, but did you know that there are actually 8 Christmas Story movies, and we're gonna grade every one of them?
C+?
Share this video, subscribe, and smash that like button. I triple dog dare you.
Yeah, I'm not going to be doing that. I've always wanted to sit down and watch all the films and the specials in what I'm going to be calling the Ralphie-verse. And with the release of the new one that's on HBO Max, it really seemed like this was the best time to sit down and just take it all in. As was stated earlier, yes, there are 8 films based on Shepherd's work. Technically not all films though. Some are specials that aired on public television. I think they were around an hour or so. One is a live show, technically a musical. And really and truly, there are many, many more than even that. There was a pilot that was produced in the late 70s but never aired. There's the Wonder Years, which we'll talk about. And there's the multitudes of stories that Shepherd told over the years that have yet to be even made into the live-action films that encompass the Parker family saga. So my history with Gene Shepherd is mostly tied to A Christmas Story. It's a movie I grew up loving, despite the fact that my mother loathed it and still loathes it. We'll talk more about that later. I did feel like growing up that it wasn't a film that everyone was hip to, which was probably a big reason why I had a certain ownership over it. I remember getting the DVD version of the film when it came out in the early aughts, and it had this old radio menu where you could click the tuning dial with your remote and hear Shepherd read some of his radio stories.
Thanks for tuning in tonight to Gene Shepherd's reading of The Red Ryder Story.
It definitely piqued my interest and remains something I listen to every December. Eventually, my generation, who grew up with it on VHS, would grow up and demand merchandise and just start throwing money at the movie to the point where, of course, they would play it for 24 hours a day around Christmas. And it really took off and finally pierced the mainstream. And of course, now you can walk in a Walgreens or a Walmart in December and find Ralphie on wrapping paper and pretty much anything. Doesn't matter what the tchotchke is, they'll just throw Ralphie's face on it. God bless him. You can even dress like the leg lamp, the bunny suit, even the box the leg lamp came in. That's a costume. You can wear it. And in case you haven't noticed, yes, I own a leg lamp. I got it in my 20s for Christmas, ironically. I've had it since then, and it's still in one piece, so it's not nearly as fragile as the one in the movie, thankfully. So, not a finger.
Not a finger!
How exactly did we get here? For crying out loud, how did one man talking on the radio 50 odd years ago lead to all of this? That's the thing that really interested me and made me want to sit down and watch all these films and talk about it with you today. So let's start with the man himself, Gene Shepherd. Shepherd was born in Hammond, Indiana in 1921, and so much of his upbringing there, specifically in Indiana, is the backbone for so much of his work later and everything we're going to talk about today. So many steel mills. Shepherd is to Indiana what Mike Judge is to Texas. He just oozes it from his pores, and it's why I think so much of his work has a real authenticity to it. My mother was also born in Indiana, and I was born in Kentucky, so a lot of what Shepherd is remembering here feels very authentic to me specifically. Shepherd started working in radio in 1945, and that's where he kind of honed his talent for storytelling. He never considered himself a writer, really, so a lot of his early radio work was just kind of off the cuff. Eventually, he did write those stories down, and some, including most of the ones that made up the bulk of A Christmas Story, were published in Playboy and eventually into books of their own. This is probably the most well-known of Shepard's books. This is In God We Trust, All Others Pay Cash. This is the book that most of the little vignettes that are in A Christmas Story come from. As we go through these movies, we're going to be referencing this book a lot, so we will come back to this. Shepard also did live shows for many years, telling stories and improvising well into the 90s. Eventually, he would branch into television and produce shows and do voiceovers for PBS, appearing as himself, where he would visit various American locales and interview people of interest. And then in 1976, we come to the first of the live-action adaptations of Shep's written works.
Legend that says that once you've stared into the enigmatic face of the Phantom of the Open Hearth, she will give you either good luck or bad luck. No one knows which.
The Phantom of the Open Hearth was made for PBS and features the first appearance in live action of the leg lamp. This was actually before A Christmas Story. That story was originally from Shepard's novel, I told you we'd come back to this, In God We Trust, All Others Pay Cash, and was titled My Old Man and the Lascivious Special Award That Heralded the Birth of Pop Culture. There are several stories in this book that make numerous appearances throughout these movies, and of course that's probably the most popular. The lamp was actually originally based on those old knee-high soda advertisements. The PBS specials all open the same way, as old Ralphie, played by Shepard, reminisces about his childhood stomping grounds of Indiana. Again, so many steel mills. They're also all shot like those live-action segments from 1970 Sesame Street. I mean, it's PBS, so yeah, same aesthetic.
It was alive. Unparalleled glory. Translucent flesh, radiating a vibrant, sensual, luminous orange-yellow, pinkish nimbus of pagan fire.
And of course, Shepard does the voiceover for this film, just like all the others, except for A Christmas Story Christmas, which was Peter Billingsley, the 2012 sequel, which is a sound-alike, and the musical, which was Matthew Broderick. Shepard opens this film talking about the beautiful future, the glorious past, the crummy now, which is so Shepard. He had the ability to be cynical and nostalgic at the same time. The general plot of this special is that Ralphie wants to ask his crush, Daphne Bigelow, to prom, but ends up having to go with neighborhood ugly duckling Wanda Hickey. For those of you wondering if it's weird to see a teenage Ralphie, yes, it's weird to see a teenage Ralphie, because he's usually horny. Teenage Ralphie is horny in all of these, and it's just the worst thing ever. And it just gets worse as they go on. The old man in this one is played by James Broderick, who was actually Matthew Broderick's father. Matthew would go on to play old Ralphie many years later in the musical. Not the only strange bit of casting as far as narrators go. More to come on that later. But no one really stands out in this, which is kind of a vibe that all these specials have. Shepard's voiceover really carries most of it. It almost feels separate from the action and the actors on screen. Plot-wise, Ralphie, Flick, and Schwartz all end up taking their dates to prom and drinking too much, and all three of them vomit in the same toilet, which is actually the only thing in this special that really made me laugh.
Up came the cheeseburgers, the rum and cokes, pretzels, potato chips, orange punch, a corned beef sandwich. That was last week.
There's also an extended storyline where the family, minus Ralphie, go to a movie theater to win free dishes, which is a story from Shepard's books that will make another appearance in another film later. Anytime these movies stray from whatever story Ralphie is involved in, it just doesn't work for me. The ending with Ralphie coming back defeated after a terrible night at prom really works, and it's because, again, it's classic Shepard.
The male human animal, skulking through the impenetrable fetid jungle of kidhood, learns early in the game just what sort of animal he is. He daily does battle with horrors and emotions that he will spend the rest of his life trying to forget or suppress or recapture.
The film was later reshot as a pilot, which was going to be turned into a weekly show, but unfortunately that never aired. Honestly, a lot of this first special really didn't kind of interest me very much, but it got decent reviews and produced some studio interest in the eventual creation of A Christmas Story many years later, and of course led to another special in 1982.
Oh, God, I love I-95. All the way from the Maine border down to Tennessee Williams' house in Key West. You know, I'll bet if I had $1 for every blue-haired lady
that this river of dreams is carried down to Miami Beach, I could retire. I could buy the Bahamas.
The Great American 4th of July was the next installment in the Ralphie-verse, and the first special to feature a holiday. This time we get Matt Dillon as Ralphie, who definitely fares better than David Elliott in the previous special, but unfortunately Ralphie is even hornier in this one.
This sport was known in our neighborhood as scratch.
Bob Clark, who directed the original Christmas Story, also directed Porky's. As a matter of fact, the success of that movie pretty much secured that he could do whatever he wanted, so he chose to do A Christmas Story. More on that later. He always got comments when people realized, wait, the guy who did that dirty comedy also did this sweet holiday movie? But it was always obvious to him that the three boys in A Christmas Story would have definitely have grown up to be those guys in Porky's. And watching these teenage Ralphie specials, yeah, I can totally see that. The plot of this one centers around Ralphie going on a blind date, and also there's a subplot about how much the old man likes fireworks. It's done in a similar style to the last special, but not a whole lot more to say about it, honestly. And again, this special and the other specials are available on YouTube if you want to check these out. The next year is 1983, and we come to the original A Christmas Story. Years before director Bob Clark was on his way to pick up a date, he heard Shepard on the radio telling the flick's tongue story. He sat there and listened to the entire thing and was late for his date. It was then he realized, one day I'm going to make a movie of this guy's stuff. So as I said earlier, my mother hates this movie. My mother grew up in Indiana at roughly the same time as this movie is set, and what I think she hates is the authenticity of it. Needless to say, she's not nearly as nostalgic a person as I am. Despite the fact that there's dream sequences in this movie and some idealized takes on Christmas and gifts, all the kids curse, the dad is unattached in a way until it counts, it's not a cartoon. It feels like this is just the way it was. Peter Billingsley is the perfect avatar for Shepard, and the voiceover really feels like it's from his point of view. Also, he's not a typical cute movie kid. He has an edge to it. The entire movie has an edge to it. You can imagine yourself being Ralphie. I know I always could. Bob Clark co-wrote with Shepard and directed the film, and yes, it wasn't a hit at the time, but after constant showings on cable and VHS, blah blah blah, big hit, you know the rest. Bob Clark really seemed to understand the material, and it's his bats at Shepard's work that always seem to work the best. This movie is a classic, and it deserves all the attention it's gotten, and all the nostalgia. You've all seen this movie, and you know it inside and out, so not a whole lot more I can bring to it, so let's move on to 1985.
A Christmas Story.
Josephine Kosnowski.
2 years later, Shepard went back to PBS with the star-crossed romance of Josephine Kosnowski. This was the first special done after the financial failure of A Christmas Story, and they kind of go back to the same formula as the previous specials, but keeping the holiday flavor as this was all set at Thanksgiving. They bring back the Parkers' hillbilly neighbors, the Bumpuses, who are recurring characters in these films, and introduce the Parkers' dog, Fuzzhead, who will feature heavily, too heavily, in the next film.
Did you have trouble in school today? I'm a turkey. You're a what?
Thanksgiving play. Michelle said I'm a turkey.
I'm noticing the soap opera organ stings a lot more in this one. All of the PBS specials did that, but they really emphasize it here. I guess it's kind of a theme they're using throughout these specials, that they're kind of like soap opera-ish. Maybe that's part of the gag. Also, a lot of these specials occasionally will use music from Jaws, but this one just leans right into it. I mean, here it is. Basically, in this one, Ralphie and his friends spend most of the duration of it just kind of creeping on Polish girls. Here's Ralphie having his dream woman moment.
Hi, Ralph.
Hi, Josie.
Ralphie actually has his first kiss in this special, and there's cutaways to flowers blooming and waves crashing like it's a Naked Gun movie. Again, I'm just completely uncomfortable with Ralphie and sex. I don't know why that is. Here he is shaving in his underwear right before his big date, just giving me all the willies imaginable. Anyway, Ralphie takes his date to a church Thanksgiving party, and things get too grown up for him, so he leaves and joins his friends at the basketball game. This is probably one of the best sequences of the specials, as Ralphie is weirded out at the party and flees in terror because he's not ready to grow up.
Stepping out for a little air, Ralph, old boy.
Yeah, Stash. Yeah, breath of air, Stash. Just breath of air.
I think that little bugger's trying to run out on Josie. Hey, you! Where you think you're going? Come on. You hit him high, I'll hit him low.
There's also a side plot where the old man wants to buy a new car, but anytime they cut away from Ralphie's story in these things, it always kind of suffers for me. I guess this is the best of the specials. I guess?
The shield said I'm a turkey.
So 3 years later, it's 1988, and The Wonder Years premieres. The Wonder Years obviously takes some inspiration from Shepard's work, and I always thought it was just that, except for a comment by Bob Clark on the DVD commentary for A Christmas Story, where he says that Shepard met with Spielberg, who I guess had a hand in The Wonder Years early on, but I can't find anything to back that up. Did they just want Shepard to do the narration, or was it a ceremonial thing? Not really sure, but of course it didn't end up happening and Shepard wasn't involved whatsoever. And the role of narrator in that show ended up going to Daniel Stern. Put a pin in that because we'll come back to that later, and it's another one of those weird casting things. Also, here's a little bit of weird trivia. Peter Billingsley appeared in the finale of The Wonder Years in 1993, or whatever year that was. Also in 1993, Shepard is brought in to do some new narration for Disney World's Carousel of Progress. Doesn't have anything to do with the Parker family, but it's Disney and it's my jam, so I just felt like I had to mention it. Rewinding a bit to 1988, we have our next addition to the Ralphie-verse, Ollie Opnoodle's Haven of Bliss. Being a Disney Channel kid, I remember this being on all the time, but it was actually a co-production with PBS, and it played on both channels. The main story of this feature was first printed in Playboy and eventually published in book form as Wanda Hickey's Night of Golden Memories. So we've had Christmas, 4th of July, Thanksgiving, and now we're tackling summer vacation, checking off all the big moments of kiddom. As I said, I watched this one a lot growing up, and I hate to be the cliched YouTube guy who comes in and pops your bubble if you remember this fondly, but it does not hold up well. This is shot like a real movie, unlike the PBS specials, but somehow it's just as dull. The movie begins with that cliche of starting the story when it's halfway over, and then flashing back to how everything led to that big moment. But the big moment is, oh no, we have to get up early to beat summer vacation traffic. Saying it like that makes it sound clever and relatable, but it's not. I remember very well the mornings my dad would wake us up before we left for a vacation, and the opening to this does accurately capture that. On paper, the cast here is pretty good, with Jerry O'Connell as Ralphie, the dad from Doogie Howser as the old man, and Dorothy Lyman from Mama's Family as the mom. Also, Shepard cameos as Ralphie's boss, with a big weird beard, but nothing really leaves much of an impression here. It feels like a very sitcom world, which doesn't seem correct for the Parker family. Nothing feels authentic to me. The plot revolves around, as I said, the family going on vacation, which they finally do around the 45-minute mark, once they're able to find the family's missing dog, Fuzzhead.
About Fuzzhead. I'm worried about Fuzzhead.
Fuzzhead?
Fuzzhead! Fuzzhead!
Yes, Fuzzhead is back, and get used to hearing that name over and over and over. I mean, it's part of the joke that the mom is fixated on finding the dog, but it just really wears thin. Maybe it's the name Fuzzhead. It just sounds, well, like something from a Disney Channel movie. There's a lot less voiceover this time, and I feel like that really hurts the film. With the characters being this thin, Shepard's insight is a necessity to help flesh the whole thing out and make it feel homey and lived in. The last 40 minutes or so is a road trip, and it wants to have a National Lampoon's vibe, but this ain't no vacation. This isn't even European or Vegas vacation. Overall, this is better than the PBS specials, but not nearly as better as it could be, and not nearly as good as you remember, unfortunately. So we're skipping ahead now a few years to 1994 to It Runs in the Family. No, not that one. This one.
Eventually retitled to My Summer Story after the movie didn't do so hot. They even copied the font. Look at that. This is the first official sequel to A Christmas Story, as this one actually uses footage from the original. It opens up right where that movie ends, and then jumps a year ahead with our new actors. At this point, the original film had started making money on home video, so the timing was right to take another bite at the shepherd pie. Bob Clark is back as the director, and he brings a lot of the authenticity that Ali Op Noodles was sorely lacking. It doesn't feel quite period enough for me, but overall I think this is the best looking of the sequels. It also has no real plot, it's just a bunch of vignettes. It's laid out in a very similar fashion to A Christmas Story, which I'm sure is very deliberate. Clark brings back some of the original soundtrack, there's some Ralphie dream sequences, and some melancholy moments are very much appreciated. There is one returning cast member, Teddy Moore, as Mrs. Shields, who is Ralphie's teacher. We also have Charles Grodin, Mary Steenburgen, and Kieran Culkin as Ralphie. This is a great cast, honestly maybe the best of any of the sequels. It's impossible to not like Mary Steenburgen, and I think she's pretty good, but Grodin is just too broad, and Culkin is just too cute. He's completely lacking any edge. He would have made a better Randy than Ralphie, honestly. But hey, there's a scene where Ralphie gets shot in the butthole.
Ralph, don't shoot your eye out.
I haven't shot my eye out. In fact, exactly the opposite. Oh!
Probably best to move on. It's better than the other sequels, but it's still kind of forgettable, honestly. Of course, Shepard was older when they made My Summer Story, and I've heard critiques that his voiceovers sounded kind of rough, but I thought they were alright. Unfortunately, Shepard passes away a few years later in 1999 at the age of 78. He had a close hand in all of these projects, and he was always very opinionated. He knew his stories had something special, and he wanted them to feel as authentic as possible. And without his presence, many years went by, and his works remained untouched. But in this time, the original film is gaining momentum. It's showing 24 hours on TNT or whatever, toys are being made, and as terrible as Shepard's passing was, something even more horrible was happening. The straight-to-video DVD market. And here we go.
It's the most beloved Christmas story of all time. And this holiday season, Ralphie is back.
Ralphie?
Now he's a...
So it's 2012, and we have A Christmas Story 2 from the director of Jingle All the Way, and it feels like that. It feels just like that. A lot of terrible things have been said about this film, and YouTube has kind of ripped it to death, and it deserves it, but I will say this for it. Of all the films in the Ralphie-verse, I do think it has the strongest narrative. Ralphie has a story, the old man has a story, and those two stories sort of rhyme with each other. Ralphie sees the stubbornness his father has in not wanting to buy an expensive turkey for Christmas, and Ralphie kind of learns from that and decides to endure and not give up on his story of paying back a car dealer whose car he wrecked. And there's a nice moment where we think Ralphie is going to get another terrible costume from his aunt for Christmas, and it ends up being for Randy, and it's a nice reversal thing. That was good to see. That was like a movie. That's a thing that movies do. There, that's two nice things I just said about this film. Everything else about this is shit. It's totally a product of its time, and these were the kind of comedies that were being dumped on DVD left and right back then. It's far too broad and chock full of cartoony gags that just don't work. And Ralphie is the worst here. This is the worst Ralphie. So much of this doesn't feel in character for him. Yes, he can be a little shit sometimes in the original, but here he's borderline Zach Morris sociopath. Eventually Ralphie gets the girl and you're like, why, girl? You seem like a totally reasonable person. What could you possibly see in this wormy asshole? The ending does a cheesy heartstring pulling thing that totally feels unearned. The original film had such a subtle hand when it came to emotion, and it never felt saccharine or unearned. This movie is like a Christmas Story pantomime. Seriously, these Halloween costumes are more subtle. It's nice to see Daniel Stern here playing the old man, since he did the voiceover for Not Ralphie on the Wonder Years, so that's a fun meta bit of casting, but he's just bad. He's so bad, and so broad, there is no replacement for Darren McGavin. Everyone tries to play the anger he had when he yelled at the furnace and just do that the whole movie the entire time. They forget how much McGavin played it down and deadpanned so much of that performance. There's just no replacing him. More on that later. At the end of the day, this is like the worst case scenario for a legacy sequel. It does all the things that we joke on. Flick does a tongue thing, again. The leg lamp, again. The chop suey place, again. I can't put my arms down, again. This was kind of a low point for Shepard's work, and I can't imagine that he would have stamped his approval on it. His stories were these cute little nostalgic yarns that played on the radio 50 years prior, and now they've been blown up to this big dumb thing that's probably the worst thing imaginable. Or is it? In 2017, we have A Christmas Story Live. This aired in December of that year, and I actually remember watching it when it was live on TV. This was like a 3-hour live production with multiple sets, multiple dance numbers, and it's based on this.
So one day, my mother, leaning over a pot of simmering oatmeal, suddenly asked out of the blue, "What would you like for Christmas?" Horrified, I heard myself blurt, "A Red Ryder BB gun." "Oh no, you'll shoot out your eyes."
It's just a guy talking. How did we get to this? This live performance was based on the 2012 musical stage version, and it aired on Fox. Honestly, because of the episodic storytelling of A Christmas Story, I can actually see how that could be easily translated into something like this. Part of me wants to be like, how could they do this? But I see the appeal. Roger Corman infamously shot the original Little Shop of Horrors over a weekend, and it was just this schlocky little thing. Eventually, it got turned into a successful Broadway musical, and that's kind of why it's so genius, so I get it. I do. Sometimes the weirdest little thing can make a really great musical. That being said, I watched this live and barely remember it. Again, Matthew Broderick is old Ralphie, Maya Rudolph is the mom, and Jane Krakowski steals the show as Mrs. Shields. I want to be more critical of this, but I've seen A Christmas Story too. The bloom is off the rose, if you know what I mean. Finally, this year, 2022, we have A Christmas Story Christmas, the first sequel to bring back Peter Billingsley and the young cast members as adults. So I honestly went into this very cynically because I just assumed they went into this very cynically. And yes, 100% this is content. It's a movie that would not have been made if it wasn't for the fact that HBO Max needs new things you recognize to stream. But for me, this is probably the best case scenario of how this could have turned out. It's got the kind of things in it I knew it would. I knew Ralphie would go into the attic and see the remnants of the original movie and get weepy, and I knew most of the story beats would line up with the story beats of the first movie. But yes, I'll admit it, it's nice to see Peter Billingsley back in this role, and the other returning actors as well. I didn't like the idea of recasting Melinda Dillon, but it's Julie Haggerty, and Julie Haggerty is always hilarious. Things kind of come full circle here as Ralphie goes home with his family after his father's death and ends up writing the original A Christmas Story as a tribute to his father and officially stepping into the Shepard role. The bit with Ralphie going to Flick's bar is the same framing device Shepard uses for his first book that features most of the stories this is all based on. Honestly, this is really just a tribute to Darren McGavin, who, as I said before, was just irreplaceable as the part of the old man. The ending here really kind of got to me, and it's mostly because of how much I love his performance and honestly how much he always reminded me of my own dad. The man was pretty much the major award we all deserved. This is probably my second favorite of these films. I doubt I'll ever watch it again, I don't think it'll be a perennial thing like the original, but it's really nice to flip through my social media and see Peter Billingsley trending. It's pretty cool. I literally have no idea what else they could do with Shepard's works at this point. Lord knows there's more stories they could pull from, stories we didn't even see represented in any of these films. But nowadays, of course, everything is, what do they remember? Well, let's give them that. Let's give them the leg lamp. Let's give them the bunny suit. Here's what you loved when you were 10. Your glorious past. Anything to keep your mind off of right now. The crummy now.
The very essence of the industrial heartland of the nation, where I learned to dream the American dream of the beautiful future, the glorious past, and the crummy now.
I do urge you to look up Shepard's radio stuff that this is all based on. A lot of it is right here on YouTube, conveniently. His storytelling is the sole reason this video exists. It's the spark that led to every film we looked at today, and the reason his voice still endures and will keep on doing so. Thank you, Gene. Shep.
Have a good Christmas. I hope it worked out well. And watch your driving, Dad. You'll shoot your eye out. Look out.